I've made a video talking about how I use alcohol markers in my bullet journal, and I also made a part 2 comparing water-based markers to alcohol markers and talking about some various tips that I have. But in this video, which is technically part 3, I want to walk you guys through an actual process of me planning and making art for my bullet journal and talking about the techniques that I use when using alcohol markers to make it mesh well into a bujo spread, and also just to make some nice art if you're a relative beginner to alcohol markers. Part 1 of this video is about the structure of the artwork. So this right here is my sketchbook. I have a very basic sketch of a mermaid sitting on a rock here. I'm going to be putting this artwork into my bullet journal, and my bullet journal theme for July was mermaids and tropical paradise. Of course, you can make art with alcohol markers for a bajillion different things, but since we are focusing on bullet journals in this video and basically on my channel, I wanted to make sure that the art I did worked well with the bullet journal theme. So as you can see, I have mermaids sitting here over this like grotto with buildings, and the same artwork is actually done on the first weekly spread of this setup, but I decided that I wanted to draw just a plain mermaid instead, because although it still fits with the theme, it's a different pose, it's a different drawing. It'll allow me to like expand my art abilities and also just be more creative by drawing something related but different. Going into my bullet journal, like I said, this was the first weekly spread, and I already had a second one that I did that doesn't have a lot of art on it, but we're going to be basically doing the third weekly spread in July. And as you can see, there is nothing here yet. I have nothing sketched out. In my head, I usually have a general plan of the spread. I like to mold things around the artwork, but it's important to think about placement, sizing, and spacing before we get into the nitty-gritty of like the detailed drawing itself. Let's just pretend that I don't already have this mermaid sketched out. Let's go back in time to last night whenever I was planning out in my brain everything. And what I'm thinking is, because on the first 2 pages most of the artwork was on the right side of the spread, I want this time the artwork to be on the left side, probably in this bottom corner somewhere. I'm gonna try to draw it relatively dark so you can see it because I'm using pencil, but it could be a little lighter. Now if my artwork's over here, I'm thinking I will do most of the weekly spread information over here. Now whether that's going to be like 4 boxes in 2 rows for 7 days of the week and a notes box, and maybe we'll have like a title up here that says July. That could be a general spread idea. I might change it and maybe I'll do 8 columns or 8 rows and change the layout, but basically I know that I want my artwork over here and the spread details over here. I talked about this in my previous videos, but since alcohol markers are extremely pigmented, they bleed through anything, which is why I usually draw on separate paper and then cut and paste or stick it into my journal afterwards. So instead of drawing the mermaid drawing here where we'll end up being in the final product, I drew it on my sketchbook. So last night I pulled out my ruler and I just kind of estimated how big I wanted it to be. I was thinking about like 6 centimeters. I usually do measurements in centimeters, by the way, because 2 dots on a normal dot grid paper is a centimeter. So just like guesstimating shape here, I'm just putting a line right there and right there. That's about how thick I want it to be. Now I do understand that there's some gap here, but considering like margin space, you could move it over again. I was also thinking about 12 centimeters high, and it's actually really perfect that this random rectangle that I sketched is exactly 12. But again, things can move around a little bit. This is just guesstimating. Personally, for me, I'm usually an art first person, so I will put the artwork in first and then do the rest of the spread, which is why we can be a little lenient with this, because then after the artwork is in, I can go ahead and adjust what the rest of the spread is going to look like. So because of that, I'm gonna put away my bullet journal for now. And as you can see on this sketchbook paper, the artwork that I sketched out last night is 6 centimeters across by 12 centimeters. Now, like I said earlier in this video, I am doing it on sketchbook paper, and I talk a lot in my videos about how I usually draw on sticker paper instead, because sticker paper is super easy. You just peel off the back and stick it right into your journal. It makes things super convenient. However, I have recently had issues with the pigments of the markers not completely soaking into the paper, since sticker paper is not super absorbent. Last month for my July setup, I actually drew on mixed media paper to see if it would absorb the colors of the marker better so it wouldn't have any smearing, and it did work really well. So I'm continuing to try this experiment of using mixed media sketchbook paper, even though it is thicker and I have to glue it in rather than just peel off the back, because I want the paper to completely absorb the marker pigment. I will update you guys soon if this is working for me, and you'll see in future Plan With Me's too my thoughts on this. Also, by the way, there is a dog barking outside. Hopefully you guys can't hear it. So as far as this sketch goes, you may think, wow, that looks so good and amazing, which, thank you. But trust me, whenever you guys compliment my art, which I do appreciate, I can't take all the credit because a lot of times, in fact, most of the time, I'm using a reference picture. So I'll put here on the screen the reference picture that I used last night to sketch this. I took the inspiration of the pose and the rock that this mermaid was sitting on, but I did change a couple things by adding a little bits of foliage that's kind of hard to see now, but when I colored in, you will see. And also the water in the back has a horizon line and some bubbles, things like that. This is just to allow it to match with my bullet journal cover page because these are the similar motifs that were on that spread. Now, speaking of similarities, I want to continue to create similarities with this artwork from the original artwork in my bullet journal to make sure that all of the art in this bullet journal theme, aka the month of July, is cohesive and goes together. So not only does carrying art elements like this with the foliage and the style of water, etc., keeping it consistent throughout my artwork is very important, but another way to keep things consistent is to look at color palettes. So this is a pencil cup of basically all of the markers that I use in my July bullet journal. So some of these are water-based markers, but all the ones with the numbers on top, those are the alcohol markers that I'm going to be using. And by using the same markers, I'm obviously keeping the same color palette and keeping things consistent between, again, the cover page, the calendar, all the way to the weekly spreads. I will go through and just swatch a couple to show you my basic color palette here. Oh, and real quick, before I even add any color, I do want to let you know that although this is relatively thick paper, I do have an alcohol marker protection sheet behind this. That way, if anything bleeds through this paper, it won't go and bleed through onto the next sheet. Spacing is definitely not perfect, but you guys get the picture. These are basically the base colors that I'm using. A lot of them have lighter variations or darker variations because I do use shadows, but we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. A few other similarities that you can carry through between the different artworks throughout your setup could be your fine liner style, the marker, the type of marker, the way you're using the marker, the textures, things like that. And lastly, if you decide to mix a bullet journal theme, so you do part of the artwork in a theme with alcohol markers and part of it with water-based markers, I would recommend trying to swatch. Let me go back in my bullet journal. Okay, this is a great example right here, actually. So this was my spread that I did planning for June. As you can see, this is chaotic, okay? There's a lot going on here, but basically I just swatched a bajillion different markers in water-based markers and alcohol markers. So these are alcohol markers and these are water-based markers. And as you can see, I lined them up to try to find matching colors, or at least as close as I could between the two. That way, whenever I drew with alcohol markers and when I drew with water-based markers in the same setup, things would look very similar and very cohesive because it's in the same color palette, even though I am using two different mediums. This works for markers, paint, whatever kind of medium you use in your bullet journal. If you're going to use multiple, I would definitely recommend swatching everything first to making sure that they go together. So I'm going to put my markers away, and now let's talk about part 2 of this video, which is going to be the art techniques. So now you basically know all of the background, all the planning that I go into to put alcohol marker art into my bullet journal, but now let's talk about my techniques for using alcohol markers, because I've been doing it for about two and a half years now, and I'm not a perfect artist. I am not gonna lie, I'm always learning and growing, but I have gotten better. Oh, also, by the way, this is so off topic, but my nails are pink, as you can see, but they're very chipped and not perfect. I did them days ago, so if they look weird, ignore that. So I'm pulling out my Sakura Pigma Micron pen because this is the same fine liner that I used in my cover page art. So like I said, consistency. And I'm just gonna start by literally outlining everything that I already have here in pencil. Now I always recommend to do a pencil sketch first, no matter what you're drawing or what you're doing artwork in. I mean, it could just be the perfectionist coming out of me and I just don't wanna make mistakes. And so obviously doing a pencil sketch first is important. And I mean, if you've ever been in an art class ever, someone has definitely told you this before, but the people who can raw dog just a pen and do amazing art, I'm I have so much respect for you. I am not that person. One last thing before I speed up this footage. This fine liner is literally just a felt tip fine liner. There is no differences in thickness. Sometimes I used to use a Tombow Fudenosuke pen for fine liner because I liked the variation that this could give. Because it is a calligraphy pen, you can make different thicknesses, and this one's actually dying. That's really unfortunate. Let me get a new one, wait. It's a little better. You can kind of see, it's kind of hard to tell, but you can make different thicknesses when you push down on the pen because it's a calligraphy pen. Whereas a fine liner, whether you push down or not, it's going to be a monoline. So it depends whatever style you prefer. But because, again, I used this particular pen for the original setup, so I'm going to do the same thing here to make them look like they were made basically at the same time. Okay, so my line art section is pretty much done, and because I am using a fine liner that dries basically immediately and completely absorbs into the paper, I can use an eraser right afterwards and just erase all the pencil marks underneath. Now what we're looking at here is just basically a general outline of what I'm going to be coloring in, but I did add a little bit of texture with the line art itself. There are definitely some nicks and like marks. Those I use the pen for because that's going to be like the rock structure, and I wanted a little bit of texture in the rock. Some things you can add post coloring, but I wanted to do some before. There's also a lot of like squiggles and lines in the flowers, and that's purposeful to make it look more full and bushy when it's just, again, outlines basically. And the last thing are just some like lines in the water. That's going to be the reflection of the sun on the water itself. Now that everything is basically outlined in, the next step is just go in and color. Now if this is frightening to you, or if it's like the first bit of coloring that you're doing in the setup, it might be scary to go through all the work of like drawing and outlining and then you go in and color it and things look bad. So what I recommend in that case is to come over on the side and just draw a small little thumbnail with your pencil. It literally does not have to be perfect. We're just going to do hair, tail, bush, 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 rock, water, bubbles. It looks very bad. But that is the point of a thumbnail. It doesn't have to look good. I'm just going to outline where I want the colors to be and what colors I want them to be. Number one, the rocks themselves are relatively simple. They're going to be gray. So I'm going to start with the lightest tone of gray that I have and just kind of sketch around where I want it to be. Same thing for like the flower bushes, super easy because it's just dots of pink, and then around the pink is going to be the light green. I am only using like one shade of each color for this. We'll talk about shadows in a few minutes, but now it's just about finding where I want placement to be first. Water is also pretty easy because it's water, it's blue. Okay, so the water, I'm just going to color in blue here. Now the question is the mermaid. She's the one that can basically be any color that we want her to be depending on placement. Now I don't want her to be blue because then she will literally blend right into the water itself because she's sitting right next to the water. So I'm thinking I want her tail to be pink because there are pink flowers, but none of them are actually going to be touching the tail. So there's going to be a difference and balance in the color placement. Now, skin wise, she can either be like super dark tan or super light. The reason I don't want a medium tone is because the rocks are pretty medium tone, so I don't want her skin to blend in with the rocks. So I'm thinking I'm going to do a mermaid with really fair skin and really dark hair because I did some with darker skin and lighter hair on the cover page. Okay, I pulled out a couple more markers. I am going to swatch them on the side. Swatching is very important. Oh, that one is so light. Okay, so looking at these colors right here, this middle one I think is too orange, so I'm going to take this one, which is pastel peach, out of the equation. So I think we're going to do this color for her skin, which is the lightest tone. Oh wait, shoot, my apologies. This was the orange one. This is why we do thumbnails, guys, because we don't want to make mistakes like this. So this one I'm taking out of the equation. Pastel peach is the light one. We can keep this one in. This is going to be her skin tone. I will use this darker, more pinkier tone for the shadows on her face. And then she's going to have this darker brown for her hair. All right, so once we know where everything's going to be, it's basically just time to jump right in. Okay, we can't be timid anymore. Let's just get right into it. In my art, just to make things simple, I always start with the lightest tone and then build darker because it's always easier to go darker than lighter. And I also usually have at least one, but more often two darker tones. That way there are three different values of the same color. And that way I know I can get deeper shadows, but also have the lighter bits have a lot of contrast in the color. And if I want to go even lighter, I usually go through at the end and add white highlights to things, but I can always add more shadow if I need to. So basically every color in the color palette that I have on the right side of the spread here, I have at least one and usually two darker tones or lighter tones of the colors themselves. And I will always start with the lighter one whenever I color something in, and then I will add shadow where the light won't hit it afterwards. Technically, shadows are much more complicated than that. I mean, if you're really trying to be professional with it, usually sunlight is more warm toned, so shadows can usually be cooler toned, which is why when people are drawing skin, they usually have the highlights be with warmer oranges and then the cool tones having like blue and purple undertones. Those are technically the ways that professional artists do things, and when I'm doing more like intensive artwork, I'll probably focus on those more. I like to draw in my sketchbook sometimes on my own, and then I will try to like improve my skills. And if you do that type of like level of art in your bullet journal, more power to you. You can definitely look at more, again, professional art tutorials, but since this is just a beginner tutorial, and usually because I do more simple art in my bullet journal than the more complicated stuff, the 3-layered shadow system works well for me. Now, as far as blending goes, the pigments will naturally want to blend and mix where they overlap a little bit, but if the colors are just a little bit too different and they don't want to blend well, I would recommend going in with the lighter color in between things and kind of using circular motions to blend out. For example, if there's a light, medium, and dark tones In between the light and medium, I would use the light one and then overlap where the two colors meet to blend it out. Same thing for the medium and dark. If they are overlapping and not blending well, I will use the medium tone, scribble over where the dark meets the medium, and try to make that mid-tone between the two tones. Does that make sense? Alcohol markers also sometimes dry a little bit lighter than the color that they originally put down. It depends what kind of paper you're using, in my opinion, but this does happen. So it's not as extreme as watercolor, but if you want things to be blended more, you can always go into the second layer on top to make things darker, more shadowed, more blended. And also, depending on what colors you're using, you can potentially mix colors, because if you're layering two slightly different colors on top of each other, they will probably mix and make a medium tone better than it will with water-based markers. So you can also experiment with that if you're interested. The last thing I want to talk about in this speed through is the choice between doing things by section or doing things all at once. What I mean by that is, whenever I was doing this particular drawing, I did things in chunks based on the color. So I did all the water first, did the layers of shadow on that. Then I did the rocks and I did the layers of shadow. Then I did the plants, layers of shadow, and then the mermaid last. That is one option, and I did it that way because I wanted to make sure that the alcohol marker was still a little bit wet to allow for the best blend. So if I went and did all the base colors first, everything would dry a little bit, and then when I went in for the shadows, it wouldn't blend as well. However, some people like to do all base colors first, kind of like we did with the thumbnail on the left, and then go in and add more shadows later once you have solidified where you want the colors to be and where you want the lighting to be. So it's up to you which method is your favorite and which one is more comfortable when you are making your own art. All right, so now the coloring is basically done here. I have all of my base colors, I have my layers of shadow. A couple things to note. Number one, I did go outside of the lines a lot, but since I'm going to be cutting this out of, the paper, it really doesn't actually matter. If I was drawing directly in my bullet journal, I would care more about that, but again, I'm just gonna be cutting, so it's not a big deal. I can also clean up things with white gel pen if I need to, because alcohol marker allows white gel pen to sit on top of it. Now, as far as the drawing itself goes, I actually hate this mermaid's arm. I think her hand looks really weird. That's a me problem. User error for sure, but it's just not my favorite thing. Also, I never actually gave her a bra, so is she shirtless? You can jump to that own conclusion if you need to, but it doesn't matter. She's facing the other way. This is basically complete. I do add a couple of final touches sometimes. I might go in with my fine liner and add extra textures. If I thought that the rocks needed more grit and texture in them, I can always just go through on top, add a couple little lines. But it's not anything too serious because, like I said, this is a very sketchy, loose drawing. It's not anything that's hyper realistic. And if it was hyper realistic, then I would probably focus on other things. As far as her hair goes, I might add a couple little wispies. And then lastly, like I said, I am going to be pulling out my white gel pen. This is a white jelly roll by Sakura. And I'm just going to be, number one, cleaning up a little bit because alcohol marker does like to spread. Again, I'll do this on the artwork itself, but not on the outside, so I'll just be cutting around those. And then also want to add a couple highlights. So definitely adding sparkle dots along her tail because these little fins that I kind of drew would definitely be sparkling. I want to put a couple highlights in her bangs, not much, but just a little bit in her hair, maybe along the crest of her head where the light would hit it, that kind of thing. Adding a little bit of white to the flowers. And again, I'm really not focusing on even staying in the lines here. Very scribbly, very loose. Foliage is one of those things that the looser and messy it is, it almost looks better. Highlights to the bubbles, highlights to these bits of water that have the light reflecting on them. This one I'm actually almost coloring completely with white because it's supposed to be really, really light there. And that's probably just gonna call it good for me. And now the next step is basically just to take my scissors, cut this out, and then put it into my bullet journal. Now that I have my weekly spread back and I have my artwork right here, the next step is basically just to paste it right here. Now, one thing that I'm thinking about is, do I either paste it in just like this with a complete rectangle, or do I cut a little bit around the artwork? That way there is more dot grid paper because I'm not covering it up with this white space that's basically useless. And I think I'm gonna go with the second option. I did that with the cover page of this setup and also because I like having the dot grid throughout most of the page. So I'm just gonna take out my scissors again and cut a rough outline around where the line art is. It's not perfect, it's not even measured. I just kind of turn the paper and go around all of these bubbles and then the mermaid's face and hair. Like I said, since this isn't actually sticker paper, I can't just peel off the back, but I do have a good old-fashioned Elmer's glue stick, so I'll just be using that to apply glue like everyone does since kindergarten. There we go. All right, and that is basically going to be it. I have a lot of room to play here. There's a lot of open space for me to change the weekly spread layout, but unfortunately that's not going to happen in this video, but you'll definitely see a finalized spread on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube Shorts. With that being said, I really hope that this video was helpful for you guys if you want to learn more about putting artwork with alcohol markers in your bullet journal like I do very frequently. I think 6 out of the 7 bullet journal setups that I've made in 2024, along with both of the opening bullet journal setups, all have alcohol marker art in them. So I will link that playlist down below for you to go check out, see my process with other artworks. As always, subscribe below because I post bullet journaling videos every single Saturday. And if you have any questions about this video, or if you want a part 4 and what you want the part 4 to be about, let me know in the comments. I love you guys so much. Have an amazing rest of your day. And if you want to go back and watch part 2 of this series that I made, I will link the video right over here. Goodbye.